Okay, who's going to be the brave one to ask the first question? Why don't you state your name and that sort of thing so that we know who's asking the question? Look at the bottom.
No? Yeah. The question is really for all of you, and the weather has certainly helped us because we've moved the crop ahead. But a month ago, we're looking at a late harvest and the potential for a lot of this residue being wet. What, if anything, can we do about that? What additional health issues does that stare us in the face with? Have at it.
That's such an easy question, they're going to give it to me. It's a good question, Dave. It's one of the things I like about grazing, right? So it's a little wetter when the cows eat it. That's not going to be a problem. The harvest issue is what you're asking about, isn't it? There's risk on that. Dave, I don't see any major problems with mold and fungal growth on. I don't think that's going to create a mycotoxin, aflatoxin problem. And so you started out with the toughest question, I think. Let's go to something really, really easy, Dave, because I don't know, each situation will be different. I don't know about windrowing and letting it dry on the windrow. Good question, but I don't foresee any major problems with it. One's just going to have to get it dry to get it baled. Do you want to follow up on that?
What's the question?
No. I was asking Dave if he wanted to.
No, I was afraid that was the answer.
Okay, which was basically no answer, right? Hutch?
Dave Hutchison. I have to write my questions down, Terry, because of age and
Yeah.
not being able to read it.
I
But anyway,
understand
which is more efficient, to maintain body condition scores constant or classical where they go up and then come down like we normally do?
There's good research out of Clay Center where they've done that, and it doesn't matter. More comment, Rick? No. I think. But we've had some of these systems projects, for example, that August calving herd at Goodmanson, those cows got way above 6 before calving, and then would drop down, of course, lactating on corn stalks. So I think they're very resilient. It's the key, Rick, would just be just getting them up to that 5 or so at calving. And there is some research out there with June calvers that they could afford a little below 5 at calving if they could go to wet meadows and get them good nutrition and get a bit of a flushing effect coming up to breeding.
So it really is, they've got to get back to 5 at breeding. At calving, okay. 5 at calving.
Yeah, but if you had your druthers, you'd let them stay at that.
Yeah, I think give them the 5. Of course, we talked about the differences in June versus the March calving cows, but the other point that I try to make, especially when you get into confinement, I think trying to play catch up after calving is a problem, and the reason is is that to get condition back on them, you got to feed energy, and so they'll put that energy that you feed into lactation, and then you got to fight milk scours, and so to be proactive would be to get them in a confinement situation to be at 5 at calving time, and then maintain. Just try to maintain.
Well, he's getting there. Let me make one other comment. We've thought about this, about whether we should take these cows down after weaning in January, take them down and save money on feed. But again, the Clay Center data would say, well, you're going to spend the money to bring them back up anyway, so we might as well just leave them at the 5.
And that would be just opposite of what you would be thinking about in a regular cow-calf management system, is that at weaning time, they're typically, especially young cows, would be thin. And so the reason why you wean is to get some condition on them cheaply before you get them back to calving.
I'm Leon. My question is, corn stalks in our area rent per acre, and I'd like to know the economics of your stocking rate related to the yield of corn so that we can get the most bang for our buck and what to offer per acre.
Our data would say that the cow will consume about 8 pounds of dry matter per bushel of corn. Okay, there's about 16 pounds of leaf and husk per bushel of corn, and our estimate is about a 50% harvest efficiency. The grad students don't like it when I say we've done that, because I didn't go out and pick up leaves and husk. They did it, okay? But good data that would say about 50% harvest efficiency. So you've got about, it's a really simple way to look at it. About 8 pounds of feed for the cow per bushel of corn. That's an as-is bushel, okay? It's 8 pounds of dry forage, but it's an as-is bushel at 15% moisture, okay? So then if it's 150 bushel yield, you can make the calculation. If it's 250, you can make the calculation. You got to estimate what that cow is going to eat. If she's going to be at 2.2 or 2.3% of her body weight, right? So if she's eating 24 to 26, 28 pounds, okay? So you can get the number of days. Is that helpful?
Thank you. Now, Terry, that's of the husks and the cobs and that, the 8 pounds, right? Per bushel, or is that total?
No. Husk and leaf.
Husk and leaf, okay.
I guess I'll plug it. We've got another app that we're going to have up here pretty soon, and it's a corn stalk grazing calculator app based on our data, removing just husk and leaf, and that efficiency isn't changed. So we have in there a removal of 50% of the husk and leaf. And it also, if you put in price per acre, it'll give you a price per head per day, okay? Or if you put in there price per head per day, it'll give you a price per acre. But we're about ready to get that up in the iStore, so it'll help you out.
There's something might happen that I didn't think ever would, that just maybe somebody will make the cellulosic ethanol thing work. And we've got 2 plants going in Mississippi. Now, they're politically well-grounded, so not sure what the economics are, but it's going to, wood pulp and cellulosic ethanol is on the horizon at least for a while. But what have we got? 3 groups putting in cellulosic ethanol plants in Iowa and Kansas now? And if you think we had a shortage of corn because of corn ethanol production, where do you see the shortage in roughage if they actually make the cellulosic ethanol thing work. The original mandate would have taken every bit of forage consumed by cattle in a feed yard to meet that mandate if you could make cellulosic ethanol. I'm still not convinced you can, but there's people now, DuPont and Pioneer and two others, I think, that are putting real big bucks in plants in Kansas and Iowa. And should all this happen, hopefully Terry and I won't be around, but it's just going to pain me to pay, if I $60 a month for a pair in the Sandhills bothers me a little bit, but if it ever got to $50 a month for corn stalks, I don't know what the hell I'd do. And it could happen because, trust me, the amount of ethanol, or the original mandate, I mean, whoever thought that up and whoever thought that somehow cellulose is cheap and roughage is cheap, I mean, they didn't do the figuring. And I know some places now they said, no, I'm not going to say this, things can get higher on the roughage side if this happens.
Is that close enough? Can you hear me?
Yep.
My name is James, and when you're talking about the confined cattle and comparing them to grass cattle, I think one point that's missed is if you're a young guy and you're trying to make a living, at some point you have to reach critical mass. So if you can only graze 100 cows, and you may have a little bit lower cost of gain, but you still don't have enough cows to make a living, it really kind of is a moot point, if that makes sense to you. So, and that was one point I had. Another thing is, I don't understand how, if you turn cattle out to graze on corn stalks, how it could be much more efficient than gathering all those stocks. Because in Illinois, where I'm from, the idea of grazing corn stalks is probably as foreign there as it is to confined cows as it is in Nebraska. So when the corn stalks come off, I mean, it's very intense there. You have to work the soil, so nobody's going to rent you the corn stalks. That's never going to happen there. And so I'm just trying to think, if you take into account that you get so much more feed off of that you pick up, and you can get more animals at some point, I guess it all comes back to if you can't find a place to graze, if you're going to graze 100 cows, you're not going to have a very good living. If you can confine 1,000 and gather that stuff up for a little higher cost of production, wouldn't you still be a hell of a lot better off? That's all I have.
That's a good point. Appreciate it. It's a mistake we make sometimes thinking too local, okay? And I've just got to say that we're very fortunate in Nebraska to have a situation where we could graze almost every cornfield in the state, okay, and not have a problem with tillage and so on. And so that doesn't fit every place else. I have a brother that farms in Illinois, and he thinks I'm strange even talking about this, okay? Well, he thought I was strange when we were growing up, but that's beside the point. But here's the difference and why I'm high on grazing, is the husk is about 60 to 65% TDN. The leaf may be 50 or a little above. The stem may be 35 or 40. It's not very good cattle feed, okay? So what I like about grazing is that the cow can go out and select the most nutritious parts. They're very good at that. They're good at grazing grass, right? Selecting the most nutritious parts. And then they're leaving a significant amount for the soil, for soil tilth, organic matter, etc. But I don't disagree with you that you can harvest more material. In my mind, you're not harvesting as good a quality material, you're gonna have to make up for it with more distiller's grains or something. Okay, do you want to follow up on the question from what I've said?
Okay, I lost my train of thought. I have a, well, I know like an Illinois for cattle would get out on some of these corn stalks.
Come on up the
People
microphone.
in Illinois, your cattle would break out and get into your neighbor's corn stalks even though they've been combined. He'd still be mad. You know, that's just the mindset there. There's no way to
I hear you.
grow
I
a
hear
cattle
you.
operation that way.
So, and my point is, this is going to be location dependent.
Right, I understand what you're saying. I understand there's a much better quality. The cow can pick and choose what she wants. But I'm saying, I don't know what you put, and I should have paid close attention. I don't know what you put in there for a price of corn stalks, if that was rolled up corn stalks, how much they cost, comparative to, what was your cost on your corn stalks per ton on a dry matter basis?
When I was pricing the corn stalks, I think I was pricing them, when I was pricing $5 corn, I was at $85 per ton of dry matter ground, and about $15 for grinding and loss. Okay, so I'd be back to 70 with the moisture in it. Why, I'd be back to $60 to $65 a ton, as is baled.
Yeah, well, the only other thing I have to add is I have a chopping corn head now, so I can eliminate that whole process of grinding, hopefully, and at least bring that down a little bit, you know, to be competitive.
Yeah, the grinding is certainly an issue. That's why I mentioned ammoniation, because then that removes that need, in that kind of a system at least, a need for grinding. Lots of opportunities, and I hear you, and a lot of the things all of the confinement work here is going to require harvested feed, okay? It's just that I still believe that for us, not
Yeah, I
just for you,
understand.
for us, the grazing is still just an optimal way to make use of it. Because if I harvest it, I've got to pay the harvesting cost, I've got to pay for grinding, and then I got to pay for feeding and the feedlot pen and the whole thing. See, those are the costs I get into in confinement. Whereas if I put the cow out there, I give her some supplement and that's it.
Right, well, I guess where we are, you know, like you said, the location, it works best, it adds to the synergy of the whole operation. If the cows are locked up, you can just harvest that, and you work it and get more corn, and the manure makes more corn. It kind of works that way as opposed to where you're doing it where, I mean, it would just, I know if you don't till the corn stalks before spring, you're gonna get like 30 bushels less, you know. So anyway,
See,
that's all I-
I'm sorry, we just don't think that way. We just think tillage is the worst thing you can do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, well, thanks. That's a view from Illinois anyway.
Eric Rasmussen. We farm in Iowa, and we have a lot of issues with NRCS and so forth. There's a couple of things. We're trying to change our program from, well, it's basically should have been a combination farm, but when I was cash renting, it was a lot easier to just pick up a check. But since I'm involved with farming, now I'd like to maximize what I'm doing. Of course, I always want to maximize everything to the total extent. So I'm sitting here thinking that I would like to be able to have a big enough cow herd on my farm that I could utilize all of our silage that we're putting up. All of our, we have to seed cover crops. And we have the same compaction problems or issues that this gentleman would have. So we have to keep we feel like we have to keep the cattle off the ground when it's wet, which in southern Iowa, it's always wet in the spring and dry right now. So, you know, they're out there hock deep, and we don't feel like that we want to contend with those issues. But we get back to this whole thing with the confinement. It felt like that if we could bring our cattle in off of stocks, sometimes as early as the middle of January, and keep them in until virtually the time to go out and calve. And the other thing is that what we're trying to do is we're trying to get our hay acreage back up, we have a reasonably limited amount of pasture. So I guess the big question is if we can confine our cows, I'm wondering how many acres, if just make it on a small scale, say we had a section of land, what would you think if it was a combination farm with 80% tillable and the balance in either pasture or rough ground, how many cattle do you think we could run if we have 150 bushel corn ground?
1,000 cows, figure, how many? 1,000 cows, figure 2 cows per acre if you utilize everything you produce. And, you know, that's a really good question.
Well,
because
will I have to haul any grain to the market if I do that?
No,
Okay.
not a kernel.
Well,
Not
it
a
always
kernel.
seems to be more economical to not take it to the elevator.
Well, exactly. Here's the point. Confinement's a relative thing, and sometimes I wish I'd have used a different phrase. I don't know what it would be. But when I started talking about the confinement, we did it all the way from, you know, mesquite pastures and traps that, you know, maybe we might have had 50 acres per cow or something, but they all hung up to wherever the feed was or where we did the thing, because there was nothing else to eat. So they were essentially confined. And Terry and the rest of the people, right, you need to do the confinement research to understand it and get the figures, but I never meant confinement cows projects to be confined 365 days a year. I think the corn stalks for 120 days should be part of it. I think, you know, there's depending on the area, there's all kinds of possibilities, but if you could run, say on a section of land, if you could run 1,000 cows and feed them between the crop residue, the silage, the earlage, the grain, and whatever else, and take the calf past preconditioning and weaning, you know, to me that's to some extent that's confinement. Now, we've got a place, or we had a place, one of the happiest days of my life is I got my forest permit sold one time, about 10 or 12 years ago. We had 40,000 acres and the cow permit was for 243 cows. Now, next to that, anything's confinement. And so, you know, it's all relative. But I think you have such marvelous opportunities in this country. And by the way, Annie, I want to introduce Annie, who does all the work for me. There she is, the queen of the 1031s, and her assistant. And there's Violette, just back from France. There's Violette, and she's the one with the Palomino hairdo there. And anyway, thank them for helping the Nebraska ladies and everything. But I chose a bad term when I said confinement cows, because I didn't mean them to be 365 days a year in confinement. Somebody figure a better, hey, there's a bright young fellow right there. He'll know a better term.
My name's Abe Turgeon. I got a question for Dr. Jenkins. A nutritional question relative to sulfur level, because she's the only one that mentioned sulfur in the whole deal. In these limit-fed diets, we're feeding 60% wet distillers grains on dry basis. That's pushing sulfur up to pretty high. How high are you comfortable pushing that sulfur level? And is there a difference between the cow and the calf eating the same ration on the same bunk?
We did not have any problems with sulfur levels. We checked them in every load of distillers and solubles and things to make sure the load itself was not high. And in everything that we fed the cows, or this study, it was, you know, pretty typical. 0.3, I think, is about, you know, 0.29 is where it usually runs percent. And so even feeding 60% distillers, we did not have any problems. But I think some of the research out of Nebraska would suggest that on a roughage diet, there seems to be less of an issue with it than there is in feedlot diets, and so that may have helped us out some as well. My biggest concern with producers might be if they were getting solubles because they could get them cheap and they were storing them, that they might get a load right after a flush in the system, or that it might settle while they were waiting to use it. And so we just wanted to make sure they were aware that those could be issues. But we did not have any problems with either our cows or our calves with any of the
How high
diets.
do you feel comfortable going? Because
Well,
this is what happens in the real world. You get a veterinarian, these calves are breaking 90, 120 days on
right.
of age, and you check your sulfur levels and total rations running 0.4, 0.3 to 0.5.
Yeah.
Which books say should be okay based on Nebraska work, but that is toxic by some other standards. So how high, do you have a feel for how high you could push that?
Yeah. Terry is going to answer it because he says it's an easy question.
All right.
Off the top of my head, Abe, I don't know what the sulfur content of the stalks are, but if you're at, huh?
0.1 to 0.2 on a dry basis.
So you're still going to be below 0.5 in the diet? Okay. Our data that Dave Smith helped us put together, and he's pretty good at putting data together. I meant that in a positive way. You know, some people can misuse data, but first off, he has integrity and he's good with math. Okay, so that's, we didn't have any significant problems in feedlot diets below 0.46. This is feedlot diets.
That's not the question.
No. Are you listening to me? Abe, come on, now listen to me. And then in a forage diet, that same data set was very clear that if we doubled the roughage level in a feedlot diet, it just went away. You see what I mean? It was a lot higher level. So now we're at 40% roughage in the diet, plus we're limit feeding the diet. And so if you looked at the total amount of sulfur, it would be comparatively less. I don't think there's going to be a problem.
The calves aren't, though.
Pardon?
The cows are limit fed, right? The calves
That's true. Yeah, that's true. The calves are ad lib, so we had no problems with them. But I still think that with that 40% stalks that we're very safe. We feel so safe it never even came up. I'm glad you raised the question.
Question on silage. You had some data last year on corn ration showing associated effect between silage and silage. When you get into confined cow feeding, is there an opportunity there for guys that don't want to use all their stocks, don't have enough stocks, where you get even more efficiency with your limit feeding, like using silage and distillers, or have you looked at that?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I will repeat it. It was Bill Dickey asking the question about using silage. And the basic question, which is a really good one here, where we're limit feeding, how does this affect energy values for all of these ingredients, right? But especially with corn silage, where you've got that 50-50 mix of the residue and the grain. And as Carla said, we use lower TDN values for corn in these diets because of the negative effect of the starch on fiber digestion. Jason's been working on that some, and I'd say we don't have a really good handle on that. And probably, Ken, that's part of your idea of limit feeding in a feedlot, that we're going to increase efficiency, we're going to increase digestibilities.
I can buy into 45% TDN or less for corn stock. But what if you were restricting, we restrict our cows down to about, well, Ed, what did we do, 13 pounds a day, dry matter?
13, 14.
Yeah. And so if you're 13 rumen retention of that fiber for 48 hours instead of 10 hours or something, just pick a figure, how much does that increase the fiber digestibility?
Right.
I suspect a lot.
And that, Ken is making the point with low intakes, with limited intakes, with increased rumen retention times, higher pHs because of less effect of the total amount of starch in the diet, right? That it would cause us to believe that digestibilities would go up, the digestibility of the fiber. Now, I've got to say, corn stems could stay there for a week and not be highly digested, okay? So there's a limit to that, Ken. I'm just saying there's a limit to it. Bill's question, I think the negative associative effect from the corn and corn silage, I think would pretty much go away in that scenario. So it's a good question. We've gone to some corn silage this year, as Carla showed, to make it a little more palatable than the 60-40 diet that we used last year. Interest, I don't think that's come up. That diet calculates out to be 80% TDN. So we think it's a fairly high forage diet, but it's a pretty high energy diet.
My name's Fred Smith. I'm like Ken. I'm from the southeastern part of the United States. We can't grow corn there. But our grass is the same price as your corn stalks. And we can make hay for $50 a ton. How does that fit into your systems, and what would you say your 7 systems, if you had grass for the same price as corn stalks and your hay was $50 a ton, how would that affect your systems?
I was going to joke and say you're bragging. No, I'd raise all the cows I could raise. Maybe that's why Ken's buying up all that land in Mississippi, right? No.
Well, our problem is our land costs a whole lot more than yours does. So if the gentleman who talked about wanting to try to get more cows on less land, that's why the confinement becomes an issue.
But that's right. If I shouldn't speak.
North Carolina.
That could be a lot of different kind of land, but, you know, you're right. They price the roughage so much lower in that country, and it's not all good roughage, but some of it is pretty good. Some of the Bermudas and that are pretty good, and the hay is okay and whatever, but the hay prices are much less expensive in your area, and I do think you can do some semi-confinement there with hay economically.
Well, that's one reason I got on a plane at 4 o'clock this morning to come out here. The problem we don't need to deal with is manure, because of our environmental regulations are pretty tough, and the cow being so much efficient by being in the feedlot, if you have them on a limited pasture, can you get the same benefit by not having to worry about manure? Say 30 cows on a 10-acre pasture or 5-acre pasture, are you going to get the same basic benefits as being in a feedlot?
I'll give you a smart-ass answer. If you cut the consumption enough, there won't be much manure.
I can't hear you. I don't mind you being smart-ass, I just want to hear it.
No, I think the answer is yes to what you're saying, and I'm toying with that deal right now. I was going to take out some more trees, or take out a few and put some ryegrass in this fall, and after the people around started offering the hay, I'm wondering if I just don't want to watch the trees go and just buy the hay, because we're so accustomed to paying too much for hay, that it is a different world. And I don't know if I don't know what should be most convenient for you, but the hay would be a much bigger bargain in your area, and it might, well, I can just see all kinds of ways you could utilize it.
Relative to the system that I showed, that DH with supplement system, I think is what you're referring to. So you've got 10 acres of grass, and so you double the number of cows and feed them some harvested feed. And if you've got hay, again, our challenge was to get them to eat that harvested feed. So we've got wet distillers. So I think that would be the challenge, is to have something you could put with the hay.
Yeah, that's what I'm assuming. You grind the hay up with the appropriate part of distiller's grain and feed them in the pasture.
That's a system that I think would have a lot of potential for you.
All right,
Yes.
thank you.
Yeah. Dave?
The concept you're talking about, the nutrient and the concept, they may have to be readapted for different systems, like that's been discussed in the government. I think it's the concept you've got, not 365 days, but as part of
Right. Yeah, Dave Hutchison's comment is about the concept here, and that's exactly right. Relative to Ken's comments, he didn't mean, and we knew that, but we said, okay, from a research standpoint, let's pen them up and see how they perform, and then start developing these options. And that's what systems research is about, is determining what your resources are, and then how they fit. So that was a really good discussion we just had about the resources that are available there, and the type of pasture, I think, that would respond well to be supplementing there, letting the cattle spread manure, and so all of that nitrogen, not all of it, but a high proportion of that nitrogen that you would supplement to them would go back on the field as nitrogen fertilizer, see? So there's a great opportunity for that. Again, we're blessed with having wet distillers that just will cover up wheat straw or corn stalks or poor quality hay or whatever. Can Terry ask a question, or do you need to?
I'll try to be brief. Ken made a couple of comments that caught my attention, and they agree with my biases. I'm going to try to phrase this as an intelligent question, but you referred to cow-calf businesses being break-even. In my bias, it'd be break-even at best, across the nation. And you also inferred that land ownership was a significant part of your success of your career. And I would agree. I see that with a lot of cow-calf operators, at the end of their career, however they pass it on down to their heirs, that their equity or their net worth is tied up mostly in land. Is there some way in the systems analysis that you guys are going through with this change of cow systems, that rather than using opportunity values of the uses of land, we can incorporate land ownership, whether it's $500 an acre sandhill ground or $10,000 an acre Iowa farm ground? The land ownership is a key component that seems to be missing, rather than just the opportunity value of the use of that land.
Well, that is so right, because if I would have, whatever money I used to have on hand that I didn't spend at a party or whatever, we'd buy land, and we happened to buy the last of it, or I did, in 1988, which I passed up 2 Sandhills ranches. One sat right on the North Loop River out by Brewster. I remember that one at $65 an acre, and I thought the New Mexico one was a better buy. Either one was a steal, but there's nothing that beat land investment, and so therefore confinement cow operations, which don't allow you to accumulate as much land, wouldn't be as profitable, assuming that that the merry-go-round keeps going. I'm not so sure it will. I don't have a lot of secrets because I don't have a good enough memory, but our last place we sold in California, or my last place, brought $40,000 per cow unit carrying capacity. Well, it didn't take a PhD to figure out that it was a pretty good deal to trade that for something different. And you know, I just don't know where it can go. We have millionaires being bought out by billionaires all over the West now, and that's where you see it the most, Montana and places like that. And I don't think it can continue. I'm not sure when, like I said, when the merry-go-round stops, but I think it has to someplace. But my whole deal on going to Mississippi is I've been in a drought someplace all my life, you know, starting in Boone County, Nebraska about 76 years ago. And I just wanted to be someplace where I had a lot of water and some trees, you know. And so that's why we traded for the country there in Mississippi. And I don't mean to ramble, but when you can trade $10,000 an acre Nebraska land, pick a figure, farmland and that, for $2,000 an acre land with pretty damn good timber on it in Mississippi, that's a pretty good trade. And maybe I can do a land deal a little longer there, but I don't know. The point is, I don't know that you can in Nebraska, and I sure as heck don't know that you can in Montana or California or some of those places. It just doesn't seem possible to me, but I'm rambling too much on this, but land accumulation is where the money, but the cows have made money the last 10 years too, but land accumulation is where the real money has been. But I'm not so sure that, you know, that ride is almost over.
Okay, let's take one more question, and then we're going to set up here for the social hour. Go ahead.
Matt Greenquist from Nebraska. I just have a simple, quick question for you, Dr. Klopfenstein. One that I think is important in your partial budget. And I think it makes a big difference in how we look at that. Is that based on an adjusted weaning weight or the actual weaning weight? Because you get two different answers in some of the comparisons.
And my numbers that I presented today are slightly different than what's in the proceeding because I adjusted one of the weaning weights. On the weights for the Dalby Halleck calves, I was using weights from 2011 and 2012. 12 was our drought year, so we early weaned, and those cows were all going to slaughter anyway. Well, our weaning weights were lighter because we early weaned. And so I went back and used historical data from the Dalby Halleck farm, which was more representative. My point being that those are not adjusted. They're the actual weaning weights, and I think that's the point. Were you listening, Matt? I don't see where you went now. Hold up your hand. My point was that if you late wean and you get more weight, I've paid for the stalks and the supplement for the cows and calves, you see what I mean? I'm going to take credit for that extra weight. Okay. Now, if there's a discount for those calves because of a slide, then I have not accounted for that yet. Okay. But they are the as-is weights, not adjusted. For that reason, because weaning age varies. It's part of the system. Is that clear?
Okay, let's give our panelists a round of applause.